Welcome back to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast for episode 330. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Ubisoft doing more Ubisoft things, my Atomfall first impressions, Nintendo's last Switch 1 Direct, and much more. This week was a pretty normal one, nothing too out of the ordinary or crazy. I think that it was a good one. There's a couple stories I'm really excited to talk about, the Ubisoft one especially. I think this last week was definitely a time for me to reflect and kind of reinforce my belief that, you know, gaming discourse has been like potentially permanently messed up, even though there are some signs that people are starting to push back against some of the worst actors. And we'll talk about it. But there was a situation where with Assassin's Creed that was very interesting and gave me a little bit of hope. But what didn't give me hope is seeing, you know, content creators and kind of gaming commentators that, you know, 4 or 5 years ago I would have told you, like, yeah, these people are like pretty objective, try to be unbiased, or at least speak to their bias, and try to find the fun in gaming, right? And that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. The gaming influencer circle is pretty small, right? You know, people like me are a dime a dozen, just to be honest. Like, I understand that. I hope that in the way I talk about and cover things, it's obvious that I understand that. The number of actually influential gaming commentators and influencers and even journalists, if you throw them in there too, is pretty small. And I think that's two factors, right? I don't think that space is as big as you want it to be. You know, we've seen, especially journalists, you know, they get laid off or leave their, you know, fairly big, they leave a Kotaku or IGN or whatever, and they all start a podcast, they all start a Patreon, they all start a Discord, and some of them have taken off, but almost all of them don't. So I think that the space just can't support that many people, right? But I also think it's kind of purposeful. I think that you definitely see very little interaction between the haves and the have-nots in the kind of gaming influencer commentary space. You know, discourse in gaming in general is in kind of a bad spot. Mostly, I think, because of the grifters and the bad influencers and the people who are literally just, I think, trying to make a buck off of preying on the worst of the worst, right? Who just happen to also be the ones who are most willing to open up their wallets. But those people are always going to be around. I think what's really disappointed me is, you know, kind of what I said before about, you know, people who 4 or 5 years ago, I would have recommended to anyone, and I would have tried to get them on this podcast or tried to get on theirs or try to interact or be in their circle at all. And now basically every one of those people are just the most like pessimistic, pretentious, contrarian, just kind of boring people, because you always know what they're going to say. And that sucks. You know, I miss being excited for so-and-so's new review or recommendation or their stream or whatever. And instead now, you know, a game's about to come out. I can, you know, think of a few right now where there's a handful of extremely well-known and unfortunately still influential voices in the game space, whether they're a reviewer or just commentator, content creator, whatever, who, like, I can tell you exactly right now what they're going to say about those games next week or later in the month, right? And that's boring. That sucks. And that may be the biggest issue for me, is that I just really don't believe that things are being done in like good faith at this point by a lot of people. I think it sucks that, you know, I appreciate people trying to make this stuff their full-time gig, but almost every single person who does that takes a huge dive when it comes to, in my opinion, integrity, honesty, and things like that. And beyond that, when you make something that is a fun hobby or a passion your job, 99% of the time, in my experience, it ruins it. And I think we see that. So, there's always that hope for a new generation of people and the next, some handful of people to come up and be the new creators. But unfortunately, a lot of the newer people that you see coming into this space are just doing what the people who came before them did, and it kind of builds on itself. So my opening thoughts here kind of finalize with hoping that we maybe some of those people can get back to actually enjoying games. Maybe some new creators can come in and kind of take over the space of being a bit more fair or a bit more nuanced and or whatever, and and to hope that the gaming discourse makes a bit of a recovery as we try to get some of the bad influences out. Okay, let's kick it over to gaming news. The first story today, we have Ubisoft. They are creating a subsidiary that will have a 25%, a little over $1 billion investment from Tencent. I haven't seen any articles about this mention another part of this where Tencent was already partially invested in Ubisoft. I believe Tencent is who helped Ubisoft fight off Vivendi a handful of years ago. So I don't know how that plays into this at all. But basically, Ubisoft is creating a subsidiary, or essentially another entity within themselves that will specifically have holdings in the Assassin's Creed franchise, as well as Far Cry and the Rainbow Six games. This is interesting. I won't pretend to understand more about this than I do. I tried to read a bunch of articles. A lot of the reporting on this, at least so far, is very surface level, and I don't think we've seen a lot of in-depth analysis yet. And the honest truth is, I think we're gonna have to wait and see how Ubisoft behaves from now on. Ideally, this means that they have a bunch of freed up money and resources to invest in all of their games, and that this is good for Ubisoft, and it means they won't do layoffs, blah, blah, blah. The worst case scenario, which unfortunately I'm trending towards that, I'm leaning towards this being the reality. They're protecting those assets and those studios involved with those franchises, and everyone else is probably completely up in the air. Someone like me who, I'm really enjoying the new Assassin's Creed game, but they aren't like my passion, right? I do enjoy them, but they aren't my biggest thing. I could care less about Far Cry at this point, and same with Rainbow Six, unless they do like Vegas 3 or something. I'm a big Division fan, and I think Ubisoft Massive is Ubisoft's best studio, and it's like not even close. What happens to them? They're not part of this deal. They're part of the company that isn't in the subsidiary. And my concern is that this was a message, whether it was on purpose or not, of all the studios and people who work on these 3 franchises that are in this subsidiary. You're set. We just got a huge money influx on it, because I can't imagine Tencent has given them that money, and like I can't imagine that $1 billion can go towards any of the games not in that subsidiary. So maybe that takes some of the pressure off Ubisoft directly, who's still in charge of all of this stuff. But it may also mean less investment into their properties outside of the subsidiary. So, but with Massive, it's one of those things where, Ubisoft just gave them the keys to likely two of the biggest, deals for licensing in the last 10 years, with Star Wars Outlaws, where they allowed them to create a whole new Star Wars story and species and storyline and everything, right? And characters, and not to mention James Cameron's Avatar, that they were handed the keys to that game as well. The Avatar was a visual feast and is one of the most impressive technical achievements I've seen. I didn't really care for the game as much. But then, Star Wars Outlaws, I enjoyed a ton. I thought it was really great. But neither one of them sold super, super well. It sounds like they were generally pretty well received. And then you have The Division with Ubisoft Massive. And I'm genuinely surprised The Division isn't part of this subsidiary. I assume if this would have happened years ago, it probably would have been. My guess is that if this happened 3-4 years ago, not long after Division 2 released, they would probably be part of this deal, because We know that both games, Division 1 and 2, have sold over 10 million copies. Division 1, I don't know if they ever gave updated numbers after years, but I have to imagine it got towards maybe 15 or 20 million. And the Division 2 sold 10 million copies in the first year. And it's now been out since 2019. It's now been out for 6 years. So I have to imagine it's sold a decent number of copies since then, even though if you talk about this too publicly, people will be like, well, actually, Division 2 was a huge disappointment. And that always comes from people who have, who basically only remember that press release or the earnings statement or the investor statement or whatever. If you remember, Ghost Recon Breakpoint and Division 2 came out relatively close, I think in the same quarter. And Breakpoint was a huge disaster. It sold bad, like it didn't do well, at least not at first. I hate that game. I don't hate many things. I played Breakpoint from a very early stage and tried to be extremely clear with my feedback that they should not have done the things they did to that game. I'm not a huge fan of Wildlands either, but Breakpoint was even worse. I think the last real Ghost Recon game was Future Soldier, but that's a different discussion. And I remember it was kind of like, for whatever reason, maybe for stock reasons or something, they kind of tied Division 2 and Breakpoint together and said that it was like they had disappointing sales when really it was Breakpoint. If you remember fairly recently, Dragon Age of the Veilguard had this done to them by EA because FC25, their soccer game, did really bad. Veilguard didn't meet expectations, but still did okay. And they kind of tied them together to drag them down. So long story short, I'm worried. I'd be worried if I was an Ubisoft employee at this point. If I wasn't, really in general, I would be. But especially if you aren't one of the studios working on these franchises in the subsidiary, I wouldn't be excited. I would definitely be concerned. I think that it's probably been a long time coming that Ubisoft will start consolidating probably pretty heavily. If you ever look up, I don't even know how many studios they have. It's got to be 20 to 30, if not more. They have a ton of little support studios all over the world, as well as their like kind of big mainstay, like Ubisoft Montreal and Ubisoft Massive and Red Storm, and even that studio has kind of gotten chipped away. This is concerning. I think this is going to be maybe a temporary reprieve from any big moves they have to make. I still think the long-term plan is probably to, sell the company off to somebody, whether it's Tencent or someone else. For whatever reason, the Guillermo family, especially Yves, who's the current CEO, they just seem completely determined not to loosen their grip of control on here, even though for all intents and purposes, it seems like like the upper management, especially the executives, are like the problem with Ubisoft, where they have these like insanely talented developers and studios, and they have a ton of amazing IP, and just a lot of really weird and, in my opinion, bad and short-sighted decisions by the executives has really damaged their brand and their platform and their publisher and everything. I think this is not great. I think this is delaying the inevitable. And I hate speaking like that, because I know a lot of these people, or at least I've interacted with a lot of these people over the years. I don't want anyone to lose their job, and they don't have to. Ubisoft should be a profitable company. It should be a company that can, utilize its resources to be successful. And instead, that it's just been a series of bad decisions by the people up at the top. So hopefully this works out. Maybe I'm super wrong about everything. Like I said, you can probably be pretty secure if you're associated with these three franchises that just got this huge influx of money. If I was outside of that, I would be concerned, and that sucks. Moving on to Atomfall. I have played a couple hours of it. It's fine. I think that 70 was a 71 or 72 Metacritic score it came out with last week. It feels perfect. The actual reviews, I'm a little leery to give too much credit. I think everyone experiences games differently. I think in my first couple hours, the combat isn't as bad as I felt like some of the reviews I saw mentioned. I thought It's clunky, and it's meant to be a very like heavy game, right? And what I mean by that is this isn't a Call of Duty jump around, kill everything shooter, right? Like this is a pretty slow paced, very deliberate game. And so that includes the combat, especially using guns with limited ammo and controls that either are not purposefully kind of clunky and not great to use. Um I think at the end of the day, it's a question of whether or not I'm gonna play more. I I like, there was a video, I think IGN put it out, a few weeks ago, like you can kill everyone in Atomfall, and that's what I've been doing. Every person I've met, I've killed. And I'm certain there's been at least two or three quest givers that I've obliterated, and their whole quest lines are gone now, right? Which I appreciate that, and I'm curious to how it plays out in the long run in that game, and that is a reason I want to keep playing. Um, I hate I appreciate the deliberate movement and like what it seems like they've tried to do control wise with this game. But it does this thing where your side to side, and I think even your backwards movement is like a quarter the speed of your forward movement. And it feels awful. It feels so bad. I hate the way the movement feels, as well as like traversal, like a like mounting, like parkour or whatever you want to call it. But like climbing up on the ledges and stuff. They don't have like a natural system with that. It's all labeled. So like when you look up, if there's like a ledge at like eye height that in most games nowadays you can vault, you can grab onto it and jump up. You can do that, but only if you have a prompt. So if you're looking at it just wrong, like the tolerances are very strange with it, and not all of the places that you would think you'd be able to do it, you can, which is very immersion breaking. I would sooner want there just to be no vaulting or something than to not sure what I can and can't do, even if it seems reasonable in the moment. Um, the story is interesting so far from what I've seen, the way that you're presented quest lines and stuff. It's not very, and you can change the settings for this, but it's not like completely in your face what you were supposed to do. But finding like little notes and context clues around the world will kind of build and give you more detail about the things that you're supposed to be doing, which is neat. I think that's a cool way to do it. It's different than what I've seen from a lot of games. So, um, yeah, this might just be one of those things that here in the next year or two, whenever I have a multiple week lull between games I'm interested in, and I don't want to play more Baldur's Gate or Mass Effect or Cyberpunk or whatever, then maybe I'll check this out again. And I still want to put in a few more hours here in the short term, but with South of Midnight coming, Clair Obscur Expedition 33, I do want to try out the new Doom game, not to mention all the games that I play, consistently in general, like the Division and the other games I mentioned, especially with the Baldur's Gate 3 patch 8 coming. I just we'll see how much time I make for this. A game I've been making a lot of time for has been Assassin's Creed Shadows. And I kind of want to give some of my ongoing thoughts. They just posted in the last day or so that they've hit 3 million players in about a week, which is really, really cool. Good for them. There's been a very funny, if you're on the same side of me as a lot of things, that there was the situation where this former game developer at Blizzard and technically current game dev, even though it seems like his current game is basically a scam. This guy that goes by Grums, as well as Elon Musk, who kind of pal around together on gaming Twitter, we're kind of throwing shade at Assassin's Creed. And the straight up official Assassin's Creed account made fun of Musk, pointing out, asking him if his opinion came from the guy he pays to play games for him. I believe it was Path of Exile 2 specifically. And then with Grums, he said something about, oh, it doesn't matter how many copies this game sells or something like that. And the official account replied to him saying, at least our game is out. That's referencing the fact that this Grums character has been pushing this early access thing for this Ember game that he's supposedly been working on for years and has raised a ton of money for with basically nothing to show for it. this Grum's guy, if you don't know who he is, you're extremely lucky, but is a big character in this relatively small group of like big, like known people who have a bunch of these weird little subsidiaries underneath them of the like hyper, like anti-left, anti-woke, whatever that is supposed to mean, anti-DEI, whatever they've decided that means. The Sweet Baby Inc., the company everyone blames about every game being too diverse and stuff. This is, these people are all part of this little movement. And what's been fun about this is to see that the two tweets that the Assassin's Creed account sent these two doofuses, between them, the two have over 1 million likes. I've never seen that on Twitter. So I don't even care if it's botted or not. There's been lots of times where things could have been botted. For whatever reason, this has struck a chord with people, and I hope it's a sign that the average person is getting real sick of these people for their own reasons. When it comes back to the game, I believe I'm around 30 plus hours into it. I've definitely hit a spot where I kind of just wish I could golden path it. And the way this game is, with needing to level up and areas being kind of level gated and things like that, I've literally only explored 2 of the, I think, like 7 or 8 regions of the game. I've killed like half of the targets that you're supposed to kill, so I don't really know how it plays out in the long run. I'm sure things happen. I'm struggling to keep playing it, like, because what I enjoy the most about it almost is just running around and doing like taking out little bases and stuff. But I don't want to just keep doing that because there's other stuff coming up. There's other games I want to play. And it's been interesting. It's a game I really, really enjoy. I think I'm settling in around like probably like an 8.5 out of 10 for when I do a review at some point. I just, it's the first Assassin's Creed that has felt like an Assassin's Creed for me since Origins, probably, or maybe even before. I really liked Odyssey, but I almost consider Odyssey like a whole separate franchise. Like, that game was just so different from the Assassin's Creed games, at least the ones I prefer. And I straight up didn't like Mirage or Valhalla. So long story short, I do recommend Assassin's Creed Shadows, especially if you like the old Assassin's Creed games. And I will almost certainly finish the main quest line. It just may take a while because there's other stuff coming, and I may even need to take a break just to kind of, do some other stuff for a little bit. We had the Nintendo Switch Direct this week, even though there's another one in the coming week. I'm recording this on March 28th. This one was for the Switch 1, or mostly was. Next week, this upcoming week, will be the, in theory, the official reveal of the Switch 2, where we're expecting to get likely some launch titles announced, as well as the release date and pricing. So all of that's next week's episode. Should be pretty heavily focused on that. This one was, man, like, Nintendo must put like a spell on their customers or something. I think the reception to this was like, yeah, this is pretty mid. And that was like expected, right? This was the last like real, hurrah of the Switch 1, where now I think they're going to keep releasing Switch 1 games for a long time. There's 30 million plus units of that out there. Not all of those people are going to buy a Switch 2. I think we'll see, this isn't the last we'll see of Switch 1. I think they will be porting games to that for a long time. Just the way that PS2 had games coming out for many years after it came out. But yeah, I mean, so the games that they featured, some of them were Dragon Quest 1 and 2 remake, Shadow Labyrinth, which is the Pac-Man secret levels thing. It looked pretty terrible, honestly. Patapon 1 and 2 replay, which I assume is a remake or a remaster. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, which sounds, is kind of in there too. And then Pokemon Legends Z to A, as well as a few other games. Some really weird stuff. Multiple games not coming out till 2026, which I thought was really weird because Nintendo does quite a few directs. Like, they do a lot of these things. And so I don't know why you announce 2026 games this early, especially when they're not for the Switch 2, or at least not exclusively. I don't know. Nintendo does weird stuff. I just like, I bring it up all the time, and how just low quality these games look, at least. And I know some of them play well, and a lot of them don't. And the Switch 2 it might make that situation better, even though I'm skeptical. I suspect it's not going to be nearly as powerful as people hope it will be, but we'll have to wait and see. Um, but like this Pokemon Legends Z-Day, it has some interesting stuff. It's gonna have real-time combat, which I think people are gonna hate. if so you like control the Pokemon like in real time instead of the turn-based fighting. I'm really curious to how that is going to be received. um I understand that the Switch is basically a mobile gaming thing from like 8 years ago or whatever, but even then, like this game doesn't look great. Like it looks bad. It just looks bad. And there was another game that there was almost all of them were like the trailers they were showing, like the games had like stuttering. And it was the golf game, the PlayStation golf game they're porting here, but not to Xbox, which is hilarious. It's a whole different conversation. But like surely you can at least just record your trailers on a PC on your development platform so they look really good. And we don't have to already be preparing for screen tearing and frame rate drops and stuff. So I don't know. I'm not a huge Nintendo fan. So obviously whenever I speak on this, I'm coming from that perspective. I understand that people really just like Nintendo because especially for the first party games, and it's portable, and it does work even if it's not the best thing in the world, and it's pretty affordable. I'm almost certainly going to buy a Switch 2. Almost certainly. It's pretty much a guarantee. Even if I end up not being one who plays it that much, I'll probably be my mini companion, or my wife. Um, I'm really curious. I'm excited to get into the into the ecosystem because I want to see if I get taken over by this magic. I want to see, especially if I have the newer system that should at least play old stuff well, even though they still haven't detailed what they're doing with backwards compatibility. And while I'm sure they're going to have it, there's always a possibility it's going to be behind paywalls and stuff like that. I'm curious if I jump in and start playing some of these games, if I will be like, okay, that's why no one cares that these games all look like GameCube garbage. Like, it's because they're a lot of fun and they have personality, and they don't care that there's like no voice acting in any of the games, and that they all you know, we'll see. I'm open to it as much as that may not seem like I am. So, but this Switch Direct was just interesting. It was really strange. There was some really weird stuff that happened in it. Some of the games are just very odd, but I just assumed they weren't speaking to me. What did speak to me is that Game Informer is back. They had teased an announcement last week, and then this week when it came around, they announced that they have their website back, all their social media channels back, and all of their old articles are back. I had mentioned before that this story was crazy because all I can think about is Dragon Age: The Veilguard, and how I believe it was in June of 2024. They obviously had this huge campaign set up with Game Informer for cover stories and a ton of like weekly, if not multiple stories a week. Interviewing devs and talking about the game and the story and all this, and then it all like disappeared at the end of June. In the just a few months before the game came out, and while it probably wasn't the biggest hindrance to that game and its sales, I genuinely think it hurt, because all of that stuff just being around was good in general. And it was, I don't know what the money arrangements were with EA, but that was probably a pretty big part of their marketing spend, and it was gone, so. So far, it's been cool to see them back. It seems like they're trying to do a lot of catch up right now, doing their 2024 Game of the Year lists and all those things. I always found Game Informer, and the people there to be pretty reasonable and as objective as you can expect people to be. It's definitely a nice alternative to GameSpot and IGN and stuff like that, where I think that they, and Kotaku especially, don't really have for me and in my outlook on things, the best articles to read. So, and it sounds like they're even going to be trying to put out a hard copy magazine. I don't know how many details there were about that. The website that you have to use to sign up for more info was down when I tried to do it, which is great. Good for them. I suspect they'll do something like quarterly or something like that. I can't imagine, especially since it won't be subsidized by GameStop pushing their magazine sales anymore. That may be more of a niche product for them, but we'll have to wait and see. But still really cool. We got the official announcement from Xbox and Bethesda ZeniMax about Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is coming to PlayStation 5 on April 17th. This has re-sparked the whole conversation about like, why would I have an Xbox? It's like, well, because you could have played this game quite a while ago if you had it, and you could play it on Game Pass, which you won't be able to do on PlayStation, or you could play on PC as well. It's been really interesting because there's so much of an obsession with that, where at the end of the day, people are going to start realizing game publishers, which is what Xbox is, and it's what they're becoming. They're becoming a game publisher who happens to make hardware. They just want to sell their game, and the studio, the developers, just want people to play their game, and that's what's happening, and that's really cool. The Forza Horizon 5, which is also getting ported over, as well as the Indiana Jones game, are currently both topping sales charts for PlayStation, and neither one of them are out yet. They're going to be full priced on there. They're, I believe, both selling early access passes, which are, as much as people hate them, a lot of people buy them. It's almost certain that Xbox is about to make a ton of money off of this port. And for me, until we're proven otherwise, that to me just says that that money, at least in some capacity, is going to keep Game Pass going and give them more money to develop in-house games and to get third-party deals. And I'm hoping it also means that they'll still be able to, use this profit and this money to subsidize their next hardware that's coming out in the next couple of years, and subsidize it enough where, the next console isn't going to be $1,000, which is, I think, a real possibility, even for PlayStation 6 or, whatever everyone else does. So I think it's cool. I'm definitely one of the people who's drinking the juice at this point. I see no downsides to this, especially for gamers, but even for Xbox, it just, for me, with these companies, for the most part, the more money they make, the safer everything is around them. Not always, and we've learned that lesson too, especially with EA and some others. But I am just finding it hard to spin this in a bad way at this point. But I think what I'm most comfortable with still is this strategy of this kind of timed exclusivity with Xbox. It still does give that reward to Xbox players. I don't love the day one, like what they're doing with Doom, the Dark Ages. I really wish it was at least like a month or 3 or 6 months. I really do wish they still did that. I think doing the day and day on PlayStation is pretty bold, but we'll have to see how that plays out. I think a game like that, it could be unique because when the last one came out, they weren't owned by Xbox yet, or at least they hadn't been for long enough to be making those kind of moves. And so maybe that's what they do. Supposedly from Phil Spencer and others, this happened because that's what the studio wanted to do, and Xbox was willing to accommodate that. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. I suspect it'll be just fine. We found out this week as well that WB Games canceled the Hogwarts DLC. If you remember, this was the game from last year that sold extremely well. I want to say over 30 million copies of that game sold. And there were rumors and talk, I believe even confirmed info about this DLC coming for it that's now being canceled. The conversation around this has been interesting, both in my Discord and publicly, where the kind of commentary from WB Games was like, there wasn't enough content. It just didn't seem right. Like what they were doing for the DLC didn't seem like it was worth it. There's been this kind of conversation of like, was this like good guy WB, or kind of my more maybe pessimistic opinion of it just wasn't worth it for whatever reason. My guess is that they're gonna move these efforts to a sequel. When you have a game sell that many copies, even if it does get kind of left out of the conversation for Game of the Year and all of that, you want to make another one of those games and you want to sell it for $70 again. Even if it sells half as many or a third as many, you still will end up with a very profitable game. I am curious to what the licensing deal is with the Harry Potter estate or franchise or whatever. Even though they sold a ton of this game, and even though I don't think it was the biggest budget game in the world, I can almost guarantee that license is not very favorable to WB. You also have to keep in mind that WB Games in the last year has shut down 3 studios, including Monolith, and canceled multiple games, including the Wonder Woman game that was going to use Monolith's the adversarial tech they used for the old was it Mordor games. WB's not in a good spot. They just had the Suicide Squad game from Rocksteady that did not go well. It was, in fact, it was a pretty big disaster sales wise and review wise. I would lean towards that this is WB more than likely rallying the wagons a bit and being like, yeah, we don't have time for DLC. We need to put the new game out. Like, you guys need to work on the next game that's going to make us a ton of money because we need the money. Whatever Rockstar works on next, which we've heard rumors about, it is probably a fair number of years away, right? I highly doubt we're getting this new Batman game or whatever they're working on like next year. So I would like to believe that WB did this out of the goodness of their hearts and to protect their customers from a substandard product. My more honest take is that they probably did this because there's better uses for their resources, but we'll have to wait and see. And then we also found out that Naughty Dog apparently has been working on a still unannounced game for the last 3 years. I don't believe this is their intergalactic game that is coming out soon-ish. Jason Schreier actually recently came out and said that people shouldn't expect that game even until after 2026, which is kind of surprising. I thought for sure that was going to be a 2026 game, which just really makes you wonder what PlayStation's putting out in the next 2 years. Maybe the Wolverine game, but even that I think is being thought of as maybe not even in 2026. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. So moving on to some content updates. So right now, like I said before, I'm working on my Assassin's Creed Shadows review. We'll get to it. I don't want to review it until I finish the game, but if it comes to a point where I can tell I'm going to put the game down for a long time or maybe forever, I'll do a review at that point. I've played 30 plus hours. You know, I recently was kind of moaning and groaning about how I don't believe that some game reviewers actually finish the games they review. Finish was probably not the right word. I do believe you can review a game that you haven't finished, but I think you need to have put in at least a relatively substantial amount of time. I still to this day don't believe that half of the reviews of Hellblade 2 that the people even finished the game, because so many of the reviews seemed pretty fair for the first half of the game and seemed to have even touched the second half of the game. It's especially frustrating because it's such a short game for 7 to 10 hours to play through the main story. But I really truly believe that a decent number of pretty prominent reviewers straight up didn't finish it. And it really came off that way when they talked about it. I think it's reasonable to finish that game to review it. A game like Assassin's Creed, which I believe is thought of to be around 40 to 50 hours for the main story and probably close to 100 to do everything. I think there's a little more leeway there, right? So I'm working on that. Well, I'll get that out here probably in April at some point. I also will be playing South of Midnight, which comes out here in about a week, less than a week at this point. I'm really excited about that one. And then Clair Obscur Expedition 33 at the end of the month. I'm really excited to check that out and play it and give first impressions and reviews and all of that as the time comes. So be on the lookout for that. I'll stream when I can. Things are getting busy again for me, unfortunately. I think at this point I'm just always kind of busy, but that's okay. And the podcast obviously will continue. I was planning a Mass Effect Hypecast podcast, and I may still do one by myself, but with a previous guest, but they have some other stuff going on. So there's a pretty good chance that's not going to happen until N7 Day this year. It's kind of fitting, you know, with N7 Legend, we always, you know, the last few years have done a N7 Day podcast. there just wasn't much to do this year. To BioWare's own admission, they even said themselves it was going to be a slow year. Hopefully, this year, 2025, is going to be significantly different. I have to imagine fairly soon we'll be hearing about that game going into full production for the next Mass Effect, and hopefully that means that there'll be some goodies for N7 Day this year. Even though I still don't think we'll have to wait that long to get something to talk about. So keep an eye out for that. And that is where I'm going to wrap this thing up. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this show and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. If you have any questions or feedback, be sure to comment on Spotify or YouTube. Let me know in my Discord or hit me up on social media at Bon Diesel or at The Baunfire. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So, until next time.
Thank you.